Welcome to Washington Today on C-SPAN Radio for Tuesday, January 4th, 2022. Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer pressing ahead with voting rights legislation and changing the Senate rules to get around a Republican filibuster, but doing so requires all 50 members of the Senate Democratic Caucus to support the idea, and at least one, Joe Manchin, not a definite yes yet, saying today his preference is to get bipartisan agreement for any Senate rules changes. U.S. Capitol Police Chief Thomas Manger giving an update on Capitol Hill security ahead of Thursday's anniversary of the January 6th attack on the Capitol, which occurred when Congress was counting the electoral votes from the 2020 election. We'll talk with a Politico reporter about what Congress, President Biden, and former President Trump have planned that day to mark the anniversary. The latest on the Build Back Better social spending and climate bill negotiations, or, according to Senator Manchin, lack of negotiations. And President Joe Biden meeting with his COVID-19 response team, saying that the Omicron variant will cause a lot more cases of the disease in the U.S., but your best defense against serious illness? Getting vaccinated. A story at thehill.com, Senator Joe Manchin, Democrat from West Virginia, voiced skepticism on Tuesday over a Democratic push to change the filibuster along party lines, warning that his preference is for any rules changes to be bipartisan. Being open to a rules change that would create a nuclear option, it's very, very difficult. It's a heavy lift, Manchin told reporters when asked about using the nuclear option, which Democrats would change the 60-vote legislative filibuster on their own. Manchin's comments come as the Senate Majority Leader Charles Schumer, Democrat from New York, has vowed to force a vote on changing the rules by January 17th if Republicans block voting rights legislation as they are expected to. That was from The Hill. We'll get to Senator Manchin's comments in just a moment, but first here's Senator Schumer today on the Senate floor.
Insurrection of January 6th, the flurry of new voter restriction laws, and state-level efforts to subvert democracy are not isolated developments, but manifestations of the same anti-democratic poison of Donald Trump's big lie. And they all demand the same solution. The Senate must advance legislation to protect our democracy and safeguard the right to vote. Over the coming weeks, the Senate will thus consider legislation we can pass to achieve this goal. Democrats for months have tried to bring Republicans to the table, but every single time, Republicans used the rules of the Senate to prevent even a debate. Voting rights in the past was a bipartisan issue. How quickly they forget. Republican presidents, Ronald Reagan, George H.W. Bush, George W. Bush, supported voting rights. When voting rights extensions came up in this body in the past, they passed by large majorities, bipartisan. The resistance we see from modern-day Republicans is a beast of an entirely different nature. Maybe some of them are scared of Trump, but too many of them see this as a way to win advantage, to get their hard-right views enacted, even though the public doesn't support them, by jaundicing our election process and putting barriers in the way of particular people, not all people, of voting. People of color, poor people, people who live in big cities, young people, handicapped people, elderly people. As I said in my dear colleague earlier this week, if Republicans continue to hijack the rules of the chamber to prevent action on something as critical as protecting our democracy, then the Senate will debate and consider changes to the rules on or before January 17th, Martin Luther King Jr. Day. Over the course of history, Mr. President, the Senate has debated voting rights many times and done what was necessary to take action. But rarely did our predecessors face the sort of malice that now confronts our democracy from within.
The Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer on the Senate floor. As mentioned, changing the Senate filibuster rule on voting rights reform would require all Senate Democratic caucus members to support it if, as expected, all Senate Republicans oppose. That would be 50 yes votes and 50 no votes. And then Vice President Kamala Harris, who is also president of the Senate under the Constitution, gets to break the tie in favor of the Democrats. But one of the Senate Democrats, Joe Manchin, non-committal when reporters asked him about this idea today.
Senator Schumer says they're going to bring a vote on rules changes to the Senate floor. Do you oppose changing the rules tied to nuclear option?
Well, I've always been for rules being done the way we've always done, 2/3 of the members voting. And any way you can do a rules change to where everyone's involved, and basically that's a rule that usually will stay. That's what we should be pursuing. But, you know, we're still ongoing conversations as far as on voting, because I think the bedrock of democracy is making sure that you're able to cast a vote. If you're legal of age and a United States citizen, you should be able to cast a vote, and it should be counted accurately. So we're talking about those things there. I'll go here, then I'll come.
So wait, just to clarify.
You had to wait a second. It was hard, wasn't it? It was hard.
I was okay. So just to be clear, you are open to the idea of using the nuclear option to change the rules to pass voting rights legislation on a simple majority?
Let me just say that to being open to a rules change that would create a nuclear option, it's very, very difficult. It's a heavy lift. And the reason I say it's a heavy lift is that once you change a rule or you have a carve out, and I've always said this, anytime there's a carve out, you eat the whole turkey. There's nothing left because it comes back and forth. So you want things that will be sustainable. That's what you're looking for. So that common sense commonality, but if you know, I just believe that it's bedrock of democracy is voting, and we have to do what we can in order to preserve that. But let's just see. The conversations are still ongoing. I've been talking to everybody. We've been having good conversations for since we left 2 weeks ago.
So, Senator, I just want to try to put a finer point on this.
Okay.
So, the 60-vote threshold, are you willing to change that? And you are involved in ongoing discussions, as you just mentioned, with your colleagues. So there must be some openness.
There's basically the need for us to protect democracy as we know it, and the Senate as it has operated for 232 years, are extremely, extremely high bars that we must be very careful if we're willing to cross those. So I'm not agreeing to any of this to the extent I want to talk and see all the options we have open. And that's what we're looking at. So they're bringing all the experts in, what type of options, what we can do. We've talked about talking filibusters, and we continue to talk about this, and very interesting. We talk about motion to proceed. We should be able to get on the bill and should be dependent. We talk about also the ability to restore some privileges to the committees. They have some weights. So something comes out of committee. And I think these are things Republicans and Democrats both could and should agree on. So we want to talk to everybody. I want to engage everybody. I'm just not doing it from one side. I think that for us to go it alone, no matter what side does it, ends up coming back at you pretty hard. I was there in 2013. I was there in 2017 when the judges came back, as far as Supreme Court judges, from just the district and circuits that we did in 2013. And I don't think anybody is happy about that when you have to do those changes.
Senator Joe Manchin speaking with reporters today in a Senate office building, making the distinction between the formally changing the Senate rules, which requires a 2/3 vote of the Senate, 67 senators, or simply overriding the precedent. That could be done by simple majority. It was dubbed years ago the nuclear option. Reducing a 60-vote threshold for passing voting rights, as the senator mentioned, just one possibility. More from the Hill article. They write other ideas being floated include a talking filibuster, getting rid of the 60-vote hurdle needed to start debate on the bill, but keeping in place that same hurdle on ending debate, or moving from 60 votes needed to break the filibuster to 41 no votes being needed to sustain it. Republicans have opposed most of these ideas. The Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell from Kentucky speaking with reporters today.
It appears as if the Majority Leader is hell-bent to try to break the Senate. His argument is that somehow state legislatures across the country are busily at work trying to make it more difficult for people to vote. Of course, that's not happening anywhere in America. 94% of Americans believe it's easy to vote. We had a record turnout last year. The biggest turnout since 1900. It's already against the law to prevent people from voting based upon race. The Voting Rights Act is still intact. So it's appropriate to ask the question, what's going on here? Well, there's been a lot of talk about big lies. Well, the big lie on the other side is that state legislatures controlled by Republicans are busily at work trying to make it difficult for people to vote. If you actually read the legislation that's been passed, it's clearly not the case. And so I think this is an excuse to try to break the Senate. Hypocrisy is not unheard of in politics, but about half the current members of the Democratic Party, when Donald Trump was president and we were in the majority, believed that the legislative filibuster was the essence of the Senate. So I guess where you stand depends upon where you sit. And we anticipate, based on what the majority leader said, that he's going to try to break the Senate, break the legislative filibuster, to make some kind of narrow exception. There is no such thing as a narrow exception. No such thing as a narrow exception.
The Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell, Republican, with reporters on Capitol Hill. As this moves forward in the coming weeks, you can follow what's happening live on the C-SPAN networks. We always carry the Senate live gavel to gavel on C-SPAN 2 television. It streams at cspan.org, also on the new C-SPAN Now mobile app, and you can listen on C-SPAN radio as well through the app. The Senate adjourning today without taking any votes. There was a scheduled vote on a judicial nomination. It was actually postponed from Monday due to the blizzard in the mid-Atlantic and southern eastern part of the United States. And for the second day in a row, senators having trouble getting back to Washington. We're going to have more on that blizzard coming up later in this program. 1 year after a mob of former President Donald Trump supporters stormed the halls of Congress, writes ABC News, sending lawmakers fleeing and leaving the building ransacked. The chief of the U.S. Capitol Police expressed confidence in an interview with ABC News that his force would be able to effectively prevent any similar kind of attack on the nation's legislative branch from happening again. That police chief is Tom Manger. He held a news conference today talking about the changes to his police force over the past year.
The United States Capitol Police as an organization is stronger and better prepared to carry out its mission today than it was before January 6th of last year. The department began significant work immediately after the 6th to fix the failures that occurred: intelligence failures, operational planning failures, leadership failures. The one thing that did not fail that day was the courage and resolve of the men and women of the United States Capitol Police. For the past year, our focus has been implementing improvements that would provide our officers with the resources that they need to fulfill their responsibilities safely and effectively. Since the attack on the Capitol, there have been nearly a dozen reports offering over 100 recommendations on needed improvements and reforms. To date, we have completed or addressed over 90 of those recommendations. And when I say completed, that means we've implemented the recommendations. When I say we've addressed them, that is that we have a detailed plan in place to implement, but we're not fully completed yet with that recommendation. So the work continues. Let me list some of the major improvements that we've made over the past year. We've improved the way that we gather, analyze, share, and use and disseminate intelligence. We've brought on an operational planning expert from the United States Secret Service to develop a blueprint for handling large events with a focus on intelligence, assets, and coordination both internally and with our outside partners as well. We've done massive joint exercises ahead of major events. We now conduct in-person briefings for uniformed officers prior to the major events. We've provided cell phones to every one of our police officers so that they get daily intelligence reports, daily operational information on their phone every day. We developed a formalized process to request and receive assistance from partnering law enforcement agencies from around the region. We've ordered additional equipment for our Civil Disturbance Unit officers, as well as we've conducted exercises with the National Guard and other police agencies. We've expanded our officer safety and wellness initiatives, including a peer support program, support dogs, and trauma-informed care specialists. And we've instituted a new external communication plan to improve our public information office and the speed and accuracy with which we release information.
U.S. Capitol Police Chief Thomas Manger, a news conference today in the U.S. Capitol. More than 700 people have been charged in the January 6th attack over the past year. But one person, whoever planted pipe bombs that didn't go off that night at the Democratic National Committee and Republican National Committee headquarters in Washington, has not been caught, FBI offering a $100,000 reward. Chief Manger taking questions from reporters. One was about the rise of threats against members of Congress in the past year.
You spoke to another news outlet about the number of threats to lawmakers over the past year, or in 2021. Can you confirm, like, the number of threats and how many more that was than in a normal year? And what forms are the threats taking that concern you the most?
So we are looking into, and when I'm going to say 9,600 is the number. I don't know that we have a normal year anymore. It was over 8,000 last year, but a couple of years ago it was only 4,000 or 5,000. So the number has been going up steadily each year. And when I say threats, these are their phone calls, their emails, their social media, things that we find on social media. So they come in a number of ways and in varied ways. Not every one of these so-called threats rises to the level of being a crime. So when we say threats, it's basically a concerning statement that we need to look into. Some of them do rise to the level of a crime. We investigate it as a crime, and there are cases where we make arrests and there's prosecution. So
the ones that concern you the most?
The ones that concern us the most are the ones where we have had previous contact with the individual who's making the threat, and we're concerned about their actions. It's going to be more than just an anonymous email or something. Those are the ones that concern us the most.
The Capitol Police Chief Thomas Manger today, news conference in the U.S. Capitol in Washington. He'll be testifying Wednesday morning before the Senate Rules and Administration Committee about the January 6th attack one-year anniversary. You can listen to it live on C-SPAN radio starting at 10 a.m. Eastern. It'll also be on C-SPAN television. Sergeant Aquilino Ganell is a Capitol police officer who defended the Capitol on January 6th. Recently tweeting a photo of injuries he said he sustained in that attack and adding, "To some, my efforts and injuries are just an exaggeration. They did this to me. This is why it matters to me and should matter to you." Sergeant Aquilino was interviewed today by Washington Post investigative reporter Aaron Davis.
You wrote an op-ed that is online today and will be in the Washington Post tomorrow, talking about a continued need for accountability regarding what happened on the 6th. You once gave testimony this past July to Congress about the events of that day. What is the one message, if you could sum it up, that you would now take to Congress a full year later? What would you tell them? What would you tell the committee continuing to investigate?
Our efforts to continue to fulfill our duties and defend them and the country and the Capitol. It goes beyond political lines. And a lot of us are former military members ourselves. What I want from them to do is hold people who are responsible accountable, including those elected officials. Because if they don't do that, this might be a recurring issue every 4 years, or you can't have this system that the elections is good if I win, and if I lose is rigged. It can't be that way. It's not the American value. It's not a democracy. And I want people to be held accountable so they have a deterrent and not to have the ill thoughts of recreating this again.
Aquilino Ganell, U.S. Capitol Police Sergeant, who was injured in the January 6th attack on the U.S. Capitol, interviewed today by the Washington Post. More now on the plans to mark the anniversary of the attack on Thursday. Joining us is David Siders, national political reporter with Politico. Thank you for being with us. What's planned on Capitol Hill?
Thanks for having me. I think you'll see just a whole run of events all throughout the day. President Biden and the vice president will make remarks in the morning. There will be a moment of reflection with staff on the House floor. Then Speaker Pelosi will make a statement. There will be a moment of silence. They'll have a conversation with historians that day. And then later on in the afternoon, a prayer vigil on the Capitol steps.
That schedule laid out by House Speaker Pelosi, a Democrat. Do we know what the plans are of Republican members of Congress that day?
Well, I think a lot of Republicans that day will be in Georgia for a funeral for the former senator there. And then also I think you'll see a lot of Republican Party officials, though not necessarily elected officials, participating in vigils and other kinds of demonstrations that day.
While that's happening in Washington, former President Donald Trump plans his own event. What do we know?
Yeah, there's going to be a news conference in the afternoon, almost at exactly the same time as the prayer vigil in Washington. And he's made it pretty clear, I think, what he plans to talk about, and that is that his lie that the election was stolen, and also, I think, a rebuke of Republicans who have crossed him. It's kind of the theme that Trump has carried for a year, and this will act as something of a bookend to it.
You wrote an article in Politico at Politico.com about Donald Trump's continuing influence over the Republican Party 1 year later. How strong is it?
I think it's very strong. I mean, it's hard to overstate. You look at the polling, and the reason that the president or the former president can have a press conference like he's doing on Thursday, if a year ago, if you'd said a year from now Trump will be giving a press conference at which he repeats his lie about the election and continues to work his efforts to undermine democracy, I think a lot of Republicans would have laughed you out of the room and said his influence is diminishing. And that just isn't the case. You look at the polling among Republicans, there's a widespread belief in these baseless claims that the election was stolen. And I think an emerging view of what happened on the 6th, among Republicans initially there was a lot of concern about the 6th and about democracy. And you saw that start to fade over time when two things really happened. I mean, Trump maintained his strength, which helped. And then you had, I think, a concerted effort in conservative media and among Republican elected officials to depict or whitewash what happened on the 6th as either a false flag event or no big deal.
And at the same time, as we mentioned, the Democrats in Congress and the president and vice president will be there holding a lot of events on Capitol Hill to sort of drive home that this was an important day for democracy. Does that just show the divide within the United States, where you've got half the country believing one thing and here the other half, with this different message?
Yeah, it really is just a two-stream reality that I think Americans are stuck in. And what's politically so difficult for Democrats, I think, is that they want to talk about this and they want to have an investigation, and there will be a lot of talk about this, especially as the January 6th committee continues to do its work. There will be televised hearings. There will be more reports coming out. It's the difficulty, I think, for Democrats is that there isn't a lot of evidence that this is a voting issue that people will care about in November. So all through this year, when people start turning their focus to the November elections, there will be a tension, I think, on the Democratic side between how much to talk about this and about Trump versus how much to be focused on COVID and the economy.
David Siders, national political reporter with Politico. Find a story at Politico.com and follow him on Twitter at David Siders. Thank you.
Thank you.
And the remarks by President Biden and Vice President Harris on Thursday, the anniversary of the January 6th attack, are scheduled for 9 a.m. Eastern in Statuary Hall in the U.S. Capitol. And today, the White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki asked what the president will say.
Do you have anything to share on what the president's message will be on Thursday when he goes to the Hill for the anniversary of 1/6?
Absolutely. I can give you some highlights at this point in time, and obviously the president is still working through and reviewing his own remarks. But on the afternoon, what you can expect, I should say, is that the president will speak to the historical significance of January 6th and what it means for the country 1 year later. As a reminder, on the afternoon of January 6th, the president called what was happening at the Capitol then an unprecedented assault on our democracy and an attempt to subvert our Constitution and interfere with the peaceful transfer of power. So on Thursday, the president is going to speak to the truth of what happened, not the lies that some have spread since, and the peril it has posed to the rule of law and our system of democratic governance. He will also mark that day, commemorate the heroes of January 6th, especially the brave men and women of law enforcement who fought to uphold the Constitution and protect the Capitol and the lives of the people who were there. Because of their efforts, our democracy withstood an attack from a mob, and the will of the more than 150 million people who voted in the presidential election was ultimately registered by Congress. And he will also speak to the work we still need to do to secure and strengthen our democracy and our institutions, to reject the hatred and lies we saw on January 6th, and to unite our country. And obviously, we'll have more to preview as we get closer to the speech.
White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki today, her daily briefing in the White House briefing room with reporters. C-SPAN will provide live coverage of those events on the anniversary of the January 6th attack. It's on Thursday. You're on C-SPAN Radio, C-SPAN Television at cspan.org, and the C-SPAN Now mobile app. Washington Today continues in a minute.
In the latest episode of C-SPAN's The Weekly, we remember Christopher Hitchens by playing some of his top moments on C-SPAN, discussing people and ideas he hated, things he loved, and a few times he made us laugh.
What's the difference between an autobiography and a memoir?
Well, it's, sorry.
No, go ahead. You probably
look, everyone has a book inside them, which is exactly where I think it should, in most cases, remain.
C-SPAN's The Weekly. Find it and follow wherever you listen to podcasts.
Welcome back to Washington Today, available as a podcast on the C-SPAN Now mobile app and wherever you get your podcasts. From Reuters, they write Democratic U.S. Senator Joe Manchin on Tuesday said there were no current discussions on President Joe Biden's Build Back Better plan after talks recently collapsed with the White House. Build Back Better is the name that the president gave his large child care, health care, climate change package. Here's Senator Manchin today with reporters.
Where you are right now on BBB and what your conversations have been with the White House?
There's been no conversations after I made my statement. I think it's basically, and I was very clear. I feel as strongly today as I did then that the unknown with the COVID, here we are. We can't even go out. I've got a 95 M95. I see all of you do. And so there's different concerns that we have right now that we haven't had for a while. So that's a concern. Inflation's still a concern. It's still over 6%. And the geopolitical unrest that we have, and I think the president's been doing a yeoman's job trying to talk to Putin and calm things down to let him know where we are. So these are all challenges, guys, and this is all expensive challenges. So that's where, Jake, on that there's been no conversation.
Senator, on BBB, on the child tax credit, are you a hard no on ensuring that, on supporting the
child tax credit is still there, as I'm understanding. Basically,
but are you a hard no on ensuring that families with no income tax obligations get the expanded credit? Are you a hard no on that, Senator Manchin?
I've been basically very clear on that. I think there should be a work requirement, and that means you file a 1099. So a 1099, if you're going to call it a credit, you have to see if you have a liability or not. The only way the IRS would know that is you file 1099. So I've been very direct on that.
Senator Manchin in a Senate office building with reporters. Vox Media explaining Democrats' most recent version of the Build Back Better Act cost about $1.75 trillion, roughly within the limits Manchin had requested, but he believes its actual price could wind up being much higher. Certain programs like the expanded child tax credit, which are set to sunset after 1 year, could be renewed by Congress. He argues that if programs set to end in the near term or instead set to expire in 10 years, the costs would not be covered. And he believes the programs will be renewed due to their popularity. That was from Vox. At the White House, Press Secretary Jen Psaki asked about the state of the negotiations.
We have a very slim majority in the Senate. That means you need every single senator from across the spectrum of the Democratic Party agreeing to what a package looks like moving forward. We're not naive about how challenging that is and how challenging it can be, but we feel good about the possibility of getting something done. What the final package looks like, I can't outline that for you at this point in time. I would note that when he spoke earlier today, he also said he saw a lot of good things in the package and a lot of good basis for discussion. And there's agreement among Democrats about lowering costs for Americans, about lowering the cost of health care, lowering the cost of child care, lowering the cost of elder care. That's a very strong basis. We've got to work through the details, and we'll keep having those conversations privately.
His framework would pass.
Again, I'm not going to give you a vote count or whip count from here, but I think it's important to note that you need 50 votes you need every single Democrat to support a package in order for it to move forward, even through reconciliation.
Is there any plan to re-engage with him at any point on this?
We're going to keep those engagements and conversations private.
That's the White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki. From the Washington Post, they write Senator Manchin isn't the only thing standing in the way of passage of Build Back Better. Senator Kyrsten Sinema, a Democrat from Arizona, also hasn't committed to voting for the bill. New ideas floated over the recess to pass the package through the Senate include breaking it up into smaller pieces. The biggest problem with such strategy is that the Senate rules limit the number of bills that can be passed via reconciliation, and there's little to no appetite among Republican senators to support any elements of BBB. Democrats also decided against trying to pass a separate bill last month to extend the child tax credit before it expired. Still, Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer promising today on the Senate floor some version will be coming up.
Off the floor, the negotiations will continue with members of our caucus and with the White House on finding a path forward on Build Back Better. As I mentioned before Christmas, I intend to hold a vote in the Senate on BBB, and we'll keep voting until we get a bill passed. The stakes are high for us to find common ground on this legislation. The climate crisis continues to worsen. Families and children continue dealing with the impacts of COVID. And too many Americans still struggle to pay the high costs of health care and prescription drugs. We'll keep working until we get something done.
Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, Democrat from New York, on the Senate floor. All Senate Republicans so far have said they oppose what the Democratic majority in the Senate is trying to put together in a Build Back Better spending package. And today, Senator John Cornyn, Republican from Texas, on the floor, thanking Senator Manchin for derailing the bill 2 weeks ago.
And then there's the multi-trillion-dollar tax and spending bill. And I know the senator from West Virginia has been the chief spear catcher when it comes to all the criticism associated with this legislation. But I've told both the senator from West Virginia and the senator from Arizona that there are many Democrats, I believe, on the other side of the aisle who are grateful to them for preventing a vote on this terribly flawed bill in the face of rapidly rising inflation. I mean, one reason why it costs more to fill up your gas tank or to feed your family or to buy an appliance is because of inflation. Prices have been going up dramatically, and one reason is there's been so much money shoveled out the door, trillions of dollars. We never used to talk in terms of trillions of dollars here in Washington. We talked about billions of dollars. Everett Dirksen famously said, $1 million here, $1 million there, and pretty soon you're talking about real money. Well, maybe it was $1 billion, I can't recall specifically, but I know he didn't talk about trillions of dollars. That's an innovation of the last couple of years. I want to commend our colleague, Senator Manchin, for his courage in stopping this terribly flawed bill, for all the reasons he and others have mentioned. And I hope that's the end of this terribly flawed legislation. And it will force us to do what the founders believed that we would do in the event of a 50-50 Senate, and that's to work together.
Senator John Cornyn on the Senate floor. Wall Street today, the Dow up 214, NASDAQ down 210, S&P down 3. Labor Department says a record 4.5 million American workers quit their jobs in November. It's a possible sign the job market is coming back from last year's recession caused by the coronavirus pandemic. Job openings in November, 10.6 million. That's down from October's 11.1 million, but still high historically. Air travelers have been dealing with massive delays the past week. A lot of canceled flights due to both the COVID-related crew shortages and the blizzard that was up and down the Atlantic coast. But another potential disruption has been averted. CNN Business reports AT&T and Verizon have agreed to postpone their planned rollouts of 5G infrastructure near airports by 2 weeks, averting for now feared widespread disruptions to air travel and shipping, as well as a potential legal battle over the matter. Both carriers confirmed late Monday evening they will hold off on activating 5G services near airports until January 19th, and that in the meantime, officials will continue working on adapting French-style restrictions on 5G in the United States. The request for the delay came from the Transportation Secretary, Pete Buttigieg. President Biden getting a briefing this afternoon from his COVID-19 response team as the Omicron variant spreads, in a way, almost uncontrollably across the U.S. There were over 1 million new COVID cases recorded on Monday, although that was due to a backlog of processing the cases, the testing over the holiday. But the 7-day average is near 500,000, an estimated 95% from Omicron, according to the CDC. The number of people in the hospital due to COVID, now over 100,000 for the first time in 4 months. President Biden saying Omicron illness is often mild, but only for those who are vaccinated.
And I'll give it to you straight, as I promised you I always would. We're going to see, as you all have been hearing, continued rise in cases. Omicron is very transmissible variant, but much different than anything we've seen before. But you can protect yourself. And you should protect yourself, quite frankly. Get vaccinated. Get boosted. There's plenty of booster shots. Wear a mask while you're in public. Because what we know is this. The impact from the rising cases depends on the effect on the person based on whether that person, what their vaccination status is. You can control how big an impact Omicron is going to have on your health if you get Omicron. You know, those are fully vaccinated, especially those with the booster shots. And by the way, we have booster shots for the whole nation, okay? You can still get COVID, but it's highly unlikely, very unlikely that you become seriously ill. And we're seeing COVID-19 cases among vaccinated in workplaces across America, including here at the White House. But if you're vaccinated and boosted, you are highly protected. You know, be concerned about Omicron, but don't be alarmed. But if you're unvaccinated, you have some reason to be alarmed. Many of you will, you'll experience severe illness in many cases if you get COVID-19, if you're not vaccinated. Some will die, needlessly die. Unvaccinated are taking up hospital beds and crowding emergency rooms and intensive care units. That's displacing other people who need access to those hospitals. So please, 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 get vaccinated now.
President Joe Biden at the White House before meeting with his COVID-19 response team. There's a new poll that shows the president's disapproval rating at a new high. It's from CNBC Change Research, 56% disapproving of the president's performance in office, 44% approving. Monday's big snowstorm still causing some major headaches. There's a story from Associated Press, Dateline, Rutherford Glen, Virginia. Road crews struggled to reach hundreds of motorists on Tuesday after they were stranded all night in freezing temperatures along a 50-mile stretch of Interstate 95 in Virginia, where tractor-trailers jackknifed in the ice and snow, state police said. Virginia Governor Ralph Northam was interviewed Tuesday morning about 10 a.m. Eastern by the Fox TV affiliate in Washington, D.C.
It's been a long, difficult night for a lot of folks. There's still a number of people that are stranded on 95, and obviously our state agencies, our Virginia State Police are working very hard, VDOT, emergency management, and this storm started as rain. It was very difficult to pre-treat the roads, and then it turned into snow, and then after midnight, a deep freeze. And so a lot of people are out there, and I feel for them. I just want them to know we're getting to them as soon as we can, whether they need water. Some of them need medication. I understand. Some of them need warming stations. So as soon as we can get our resources where they need to be, we will. But in the meantime, I just encourage everybody, please stay away from this area, stay off our roads, and let us get these roads cleared. It was a terrible storm last night. Over 400,000 Virginians lost electricity. Dominion has done a great job getting over 250,000 of those households restored, but we still have a lot of work to do, Steve.
Governor, I appreciate your words, as do many, I'm sure. But I do have to tell you, I can't tell you how many people I've heard from this morning that have been stuck in this, that have said, we haven't seen a truck. We haven't seen any police officers. We haven't seen anybody with water, with food, anybody that can help us out, as we've been stuck here in some cases since yesterday afternoon. Can you assure them that there is, in fact, help on the way?
There is, Steve, and that's a great point you make. And I can promise you that if the resources haven't gotten to these individuals, they're working with someone else. And just as soon as they can get to them, they will.
That's Virginia Governor Ralph Northam on Fox 5 DC TV late Tuesday morning. One of the stranded drivers was U.S. Senator Tim Kaine from Virginia. And about the same time, he spoke with Fox Weather Channel.
Well, Jane, it's now 21 hours and counting, and I'm still about 40 miles from D.C., I think. So I bet I have another 2 or 3 hours to go to get to work. I left yesterday right at lunchtime because I had a meeting last night that I wanted to do in person, and it's turned into kind of a survival thing. But thank goodness I have a warm coat and I had a full tank of gas. There were an awful lot of people who were stranded right along me, whose cars slid off the road, who ran out of gas. Their cars were packed with kids or with seniors, or they had medical issues. A lot of trucks jackknifed, and the weather conditions, it was a wet snow. As soon as the snow went down, it all turned to ice. And so it was very, very challenging. And there were periods of 5 or 6 hours where, we were basically just in the middle of the night, stopped in the middle of the interstate, not moving. Traffic is moving a little bit now. It's sunny. That's helping melt some of the ice. But it was I travel I-95 all the time. I will never forget this. I've never seen anything like it.
Senator Tim Kaine of Virginia in his vehicle around 10:30 a.m. Eastern this morning in that 50-mile traffic jam on I-95 in Virginia, south of Washington. About 4:30 in the afternoon Eastern, he tweeted, "Okay, after 27 hours on the road from Richmond to D.C., very happy to be back in the Capitol and working on voting rights legislation this afternoon." The fate of those stuck on that highway even came up today at the Pentagon briefing with Press Secretary John Kirby, who was asked why the military might not be helping out.
We have all watched the images of this incredible traffic jam, if that's what it is, on I-95, not that far from the Pentagon, where many military people commute up and down, stranded overnight, some getting out, but many still stranded. I think a lot of people might be curious whether the Pentagon, the Defense Department, has offered any help, has been asked for help. You have a Marine Corps base right there. Sure. People are wondering why the military can't lend a hand.
Well, first of all, as so many of us here at the Pentagon are commuters and commute along that stretch of I-95, we're all watching it with the same interest that everybody else is too, and our thoughts and concerns go out to all those who remain stuck on the highway with these weather conditions. I know of no. Well, let me put it this way. There's been no request made of the Pentagon, of the active duty military, to respond in any way to this jam on I-95. And I know of no overt efforts here at the Pentagon to make an overt offer or to get involved in any way. I think the governor of Virginia addressed this this morning when he was specifically asked about whether he was going to call the National Guard out. He said he did not see a need to do that at this time. What I am aware of is that the Virginia National Guard, their leadership has been in touch with state and local authorities, emergency authorities, to have that conversation. But as far as I know, there's been no demand signal by the state of Virginia for any military assistance whatsoever.
That's the Pentagon Press Secretary John Kirby in the Pentagon briefing room with reporters. More from the Associated Press article. Between 7 to 10 inches of snow accumulated in the area during Monday's blizzard, according to the National Weather Service, and state police had warned people to avoid driving unless absolutely necessary, especially as evening and freezing temperatures set in. Thousands of accidents and stranded vehicles were reported throughout central and northern Virginia. Thanks for listening today to Washington Today. And for more top Washington stories sent to you each day, subscribe to C-SPAN's evening newsletter word for word at c-span.org/connect. Hope you have a good night.
C-SPAN's Washington Journal. Every day we're taking your calls live, on the air, on the news of the day, and we'll discuss policy issues that impact you. Coming up Wednesday morning, we'll discuss cyber vulnerability of U.S. water systems with the Foundation for Defense of Democracy's Mark Montgomery. Then National Education Association President Becky Pringle discusses COVID-19's impact on schools and education. Watch Washington Journal live at 7 Eastern Wednesday morning on C-SPAN or on C-SPAN Now, our new mobile app. Join the discussion with your phone calls, Facebook comments, text messages, and tweets.